homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm. Welcome back to my kitchen. Today, I am making homemade tofu. And before I completely lose you, if you are somebody who is not a huge fan of tofu, I feel you. I'm not a huge fan of tofu either. It's not something I grew up with. It's definitely not something I crave or seek out. But I do like to eat vegetarian on occasion. And it's a really fun project. And let's face it, isn't it nice to know how to make tofu? Or to know how to make something from something that you could grow that is a great source of protein and nutrition. You know, we never know what's coming down the pike. We never know when we're going to have another pandemic or something else. And it's just nice to have these skills in your back pocket so that if it ever came down to it, you could make this for your family if you needed to. And in my experience, homemade tofu is considerably more tasty than store-bought tofu. And so it's just a really fun project, and I like knowing how to do things like this. So we're gonna start out with soybeans, and if you've never thought about it, soybeans it's a legume. It's in the pea and bean family. You can grow them yourself, and certainly most of Midwest United States grows these in great abundance because they're used in not only tofu, but used in a lot of animal feed. Definitely something you can grow in your own garden. And when I make this, I don't typically make it from soybeans that I've grown myself. I do grow edamame, which is a type of soybean that you eat when it's green. Delicious. I love edamame. But I just buy soybeans from the store. This is an instance where buying organic, if you have any interest in staying away from GMO crops, is really critical. If it's organic, it is by default not GMO. Something like over 90% of all soy in the United States that isn't organic is GMO. And so if you're trying to avoid GMO in your diet for whatever reason, or if you just don't think it's a good idea from an environmental point of view, which tends to be where I land, buying organic soybeans is the way to go. I get these in the bulk bin at any natural food store or well-stocked grocery store, and they're not terribly expensive. And then we're just going to soak them. We're going to make soy milk. And so again, if you drink soy milk, this is a really easy, cost-effective thing to do as well, because the first part of making tofu is to make soy milk. And so we're going to make soy milk, soak the beans, blend them in a blender, and then boil them for a certain period of time in order to cook them. And then we're going to strain out all of the solids. And what we're left with, we're going to coagulate. And the coagulation, there's a bunch of different ways to do this. The particular way that I learned is a product called nigari. It is simply magnesium chloride. And actually, Americans are often very deficient in magnesium, and so not a bad thing to be adding to your diet anyway. I've had this container. You use 1 teaspoon at a time, and this is a 8-ounce container. I've had this for a very long time. It never goes bad, and you can get a whole lot of tofu out of 1 small container of nigiri. I think I ordered this on Amazon, so I probably got this online. It's definitely not something you typically see in a small grocery store, but yeah, very easy. And we're just going to coagulate the tofu with that. And then I have a homemade tofu press, and you can press it as much or as little as you like and make your own tofu. And part of the inspiration for this was I ran across a recipe for roasted winter squash with tofu that sounded really good, and I still have some delicata in my pantry. It's now this early part of February, and the delicata have been in there since the fall, and so I thought that would be a nice thing to make and use up some of that delicata that's in there, and also show you guys how to make tofu. So let's get started. So I'm going to weigh out a ½ pound of soybeans, so 8 ounces, which is about a cup. Anybody else love estate sales for bale top jars? I find them all the time for not much, and then replace the seals in them and use them all the time. I've just covered that with water, and I'm going to let these soak overnight. Evidently, if you let soybeans soak for too long, they can start to ferment. So there is a timeline on this where you don't want to go past. So I would say 8 hours to 16 hours at the most. I'm going to give everything a good rinse here. And then I'm going to blend these up in the blender about a cup at a time. So a cup of soaked soybeans and about 3 cups of water. And this recipe is coming from America's Test Kitchen. And I've watched a bunch of videos and looked at a lot of online stuff, and the amount of water varies quite a bit. But this seems to work pretty well, so I'm just sticking with it. So 1 cup soybeans, 3 cups water. And I let that blend for about a minute. And this is a Vitamix. It's pretty strong.
Those beans are soaked, but they're not cooked, and so you want to grind them up pretty well. And then all of that is going to go into this big pot. I'm doing this in 3 batches. So there's all of our soybeans ground up with about 9 cups of water. Evidently, you can skim this foam off if you've got a fine mesh strainer. And I saw a lot of people doing that. And so when I made the second batch of tofu in this video, I did skim off a lot of that foam. And you have to watch this like a hawk. You want to bring it to a simmer and simmer it for about 10 minutes. But it's just like milk in that it has a lot of protein and it can really quickly boil over. And so it takes a long time to get it hot because it's a lot of volume. But once it does, it can really start to overheat quickly. And you can see this here where this is starting to rise up. And I immediately turned the heat off and blew on it and stirred it down. And thankfully it did not boil over. But do not turn your back on it. So once that's cooked, you're going to strain out your soybean liquid. And so what's coming through this filter is soy milk. And some of the videos I watched, they don't cook the soybeans before they strain them. They just grind them, strain them, and then they cook it. The Cook's Illustrated recipe said to cook it first, and so that's what I did. Raw soybeans have a very distinct scent. So here's our pot, and you can see there was quite a bit of residue from the protein in this, so it will stick. Big Dutch oven, a little bit of a rough surface, not the ideal setup. A stainless steel pot is easier to clean, but I didn't have one big enough to hold about 10 cups of liquid. And so you can see this has been straining for a little while, and it's starting to thicken up. And so I'm just playing with it here, pulling it away from the sides. And then I'm starting to roll it over, press it a little bit. This residue is called okara, and you can cook with this. You can mix it into things to increase the protein content. It's fairly common to do that in Japanese and Asian cooking. I just fed it to the chickens because I just didn't need an extra project right now. And because the thing I'm filtering this into only holds 8 cups, but with the sieve down in there, it really only holds about 4 before it starts hitting the bottom of the sieve. So I kind of had to do this in batches. At this point, I'm wrapping everything up and just giving it a good squeeze to try to get as much of that soy milk out of here as possible. And then here we have a pretty dry leftover soybean paste. And it's still quite warm here. And I'm just going to take this out and feed it to the chickens. Come on, chick-chicks! Come on, Mama! Come see! There you go, good girl. Good job, baby. Yeah. Come on. Come on, come get it. Come on, pretty boys. Come on, Mr. Roost. Give it a try and tell everybody. Hi, big boy. Oh, yeah. All right, you guys, good job. All right, done with the chicken interlude. Here's the last of the soy milk going into a pot. I need to heat that soy milk up to about between 170 and 180 degrees. Meanwhile, I'm making my nigari solution. And so this is a cup of water and a teaspoon of nigari, which is just the directions that are on the back of the package. So we're up to temperature. This is at about 175. They tell you to stir in a figure 8 pattern. I'm estimating what half is here. We'll let that sit for 2 minutes and then we'll add the rest. So here's part 2. And I may have over agitated this. I'm not really sure because it's not something I do regularly. But I think it affects the curds just like it does in cheese if you stir it too much. And then that's going to sit for 20 minutes. And this fine mesh strainer I actually bought at an Asian grocery store, and it's really great for this particular task and a few others as well. This is a homemade tofu press, but I've seen people do this in, plastic clamshell strawberry containers or salad containers or microgreen containers, so you can improvise as long as it's food grade. I dumped everything into the middle when I did this batch, and I should have made more of an effort to evenly get things into the corners. Even though I spread it out, I had a little bit of thin tofu on the sides. But getting everything spread out, and the way this tofu press is made, it's actually meant to leak in the bottom. So I've got this on a sheet pan so that the water can come out, and you can see that there is quite a bit of water there. Doing my best to spread that out, and then I want as flat of a surface on the top here as I can. So I'm folding my cheesecloth in flat. Putting the lid on, and then I'm just looking around the kitchen for what have I got that I can put on this that's heavy. A pineapple, of course. This pineapple was delicious, by the way. I did cut it up the next day. So that's been pressing for about 20 minutes. And then I ended up just watering some pots that I have on my front porch with that leftover tofu water. I figure there's some minerals in there that'll be good for that soil, even though nothing's actually growing in it right now. Getting this out of the mold. It's still warm, but it's pretty decent. You can see the edges are a little bit crumbly there. And then I decided I was gonna cut it in half and then press it again with some paper towels in order to get it to dry out a little bit more, which is typically what you do when you buy tofu at the store, is you press it in paper towels to try to dry it out. And you can see it's a little bit crumbly there, but not bad. And then I just threw it back in the press since it was handy. But you can do that with a couple of plates and a can of soup to use for a weight or something like that. And of course, the pineapple makes a second appearance. And after another 20 minutes or so, we've got quite a bit of moisture out of this. And I'm ready to start incorporating it into tonight's dinner. I'll put a link to this Smitten Kitchen recipe below. It's delicious. And you could easily do it with chicken if you didn't want to use tofu, but quite good. So cutting everything into chunks. And I ended up with about 12 ounces. I put that on the scale just so you could see what the yield was. From 8 ounces of soybeans gave me 12 ounces of tofu. I'm putting 3 or 4 tablespoons of the marinade directly onto the tofu. The rest of it is going onto the squash. And then I'm very gently trying to toss this without destroying the tofu chunks, most of which held up, but a few got a little crumbly. And if you've ever seen textured vegetable protein in a store, that's really all it is. It's just soy that's been crumbled and probably treated a little bit with something to make it more bouncy. So there's our delicata squash from way back in September. And I had just washed that cookie sheet, and so it was wet, and it was making the parchment roll up. So 2 sheet pans. And I had a little bit of marinade left over. I cooked everything for about 15 minutes, and then I threw the extra marinade over the top, stirred everything, and then cooked it for another 15 minutes. So about a half an hour total in the oven here. And then this is our finished dinner. So this is our roasted squash. This is delicata. This is a Smitten Kitchen recipe, kind of Asian seasonings. With our roasted tofu, I had some issues with it holding together, especially on the edges where it didn't get compressed enough. So we're gonna have some crispy bits, which is totally fun. The marinade is really lovely on here. It's got some pretty good chew, so it's a little bit on the chewy side. Didn't get quite as crispy as I was hoping, but definitely delicious. And we're gonna have this over rice, so kind of a vegetarian meal. And I'm gonna make another batch of tofu tomorrow and see if I can refine this a little bit. I think I may have added a little bit too much of the nigari because it seems very bouncy, but I don't know. I don't eat a ton of tofu, so I don't have a really good benchmark for it. But clearly I'm sitting here snacking on it, so it's very tasty. So yeah, we'll see how we do tomorrow. I'll show you the final version of that one as well. But this is what we're having for dinner tonight. So this is round 2 tofu the next day. And I'm gonna heat this to between 175 and 180. I'm gonna be a little more careful about stirring with the coagulant, and I'm gonna add a little bit less coagulant than I did last time. We'll see how we do. So on this batch, I made much more of an effort to make sure that the tofu got into the corners, hoping for a more solid square block. So here's round 2, definitely looking better. And one of the things I did not do on the last batch was put it into cold water. And that is recommended both to remove a little bit of the coagulant flavor and also just to firm up the tofu. Because right now this is still feeling pretty warm. And actually, if you're storing this in the fridge, you actually store it in water. That is how you keep tofu. And you change that water out daily and it'll last for 4 or 5 days that way. You can also freeze it. And if you freeze it when you thaw it, a lot of the water is gonna be released that's in it. So if you want really super firm tofu, one of the ways to get that is to actually just throw it in the freezer overnight. I'm just gonna run some extra cold water in here. This definitely seems less crumbly than the last batch for sure. All right, I'm just gonna let that sit and cool and we'll get it packaged up here in a half an hour or so. So here's our finished tofu. It's been soaking for, I don't know, half an hour or so. And I'm just gonna store it in this container with some water. You know, a little bit crumbly, not completely solid, but better than the first time. You know, this isn't something I do regularly, so I'm still practicing. And I think I might go down the rabbit hole and try different coagulants and just see what I get. I know that you can use vinegar or lemon juice, and you can also use gypsum, which is, I believe, calcium carbonate. So it would be fun to play around with different coagulants and just see how it changes the end result. But a complete protein that's plant-based, made in my own kitchen. Not bad. Thanks for watching, tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.